Chapter 1. A Soldier and His City. The shimmer of Aquadome 7 against the endless darkness of the Atlantic never failed to take my breath away. Even after 5 years stationed here, I still felt a sense of awe every time I piloted my mini-sub back toward the dome. The city loomed ahead, like a glowing pearl, its soft, iridescent light pushing back the deep sea's perpetual gloom. The sight reminded me why I was here, to protect this fragile marvel from the unrelenting forces of the ocean. The underwater city was my home, my pride. I adjusted the throttle of my sub, a sleek black vessel outfitted for combat and surveillance, and glanced at the 2 Ripper drones flanking me. Their compact frames whirred silently in the water, their external lights scanning for threats. These AI drones were my ever-present companions, capable of tearing through most underwater dangers with their high-frequency blades and compact torpedoes. They had saved my life more times than I cared to count, and I trusted them more than most people. As I approached the dome's outer perimeter, I passed one of the towering wall cities, massive underwater fortresses that formed a defensive ring around Aquadome 7. These structures weren't just barriers, they were alive. Biomechanical tendrils, extracted from alien technology recovered decades ago, writhed across the walls like living organisms. They were the city's first line of defense, designed to sap energy from any threat foolish enough to approach. I'd seen those tendrils in action once, wrapping around a rogue Talok behemoth, draining it until the creature collapsed into the abyss. The sight had been both horrifying and mesmerizing, a reminder of the razor-thin line between survival and annihilation down here. Beyond the walls, clusters of Thanatos coral swayed gently in the currents. Their beauty was deceptive. These engineered organisms were lethal. Originally designed to deter Talok behemoths, the coral released spores capable of rotting the flesh of any organic creature that ventured too close. Watching them in action was like witnessing a slow, calculated death. The spores would latch onto a creature's skin, spreading like wildfire, reducing even the mightiest predators to lifeless husks. The coral also served another purpose. Its roots extended into the seabed, tapping into geothermal vents to power the city. This dual role made the coral both a weapon and a lifeline. Maintaining it was part of my job, ensuring the delicate balance between its defensive capabilities and the risk of overgrowth. I guided my sub closer to the dome's main access port, passing through the bustling water lanes where other vehicles crisscrossed in orderly patterns. Cargo subs, research vessels, and passenger pods flitted through the currents like schools of fish, each contributing to the rhythm of life within Aquadome 7. Inside the dome, I knew life was thriving. Families walked through illuminated biodomes, children played in zero-gravity sports halls, and scientists worked tirelessly in labs overlooking the ocean. I wasn't part of that world. Not really. My place was out here, in the shadows of the abyss, where danger lurked, and the city's survival rested on the vigilance of people like me. The AI in my sub chimed. Routine perimeter check complete. All systems nominal. Good, I muttered, leaning back in my seat and taking a moment to admire the view. I'd seen horrors in these waters, things that would haunt lesser men. But today, the ocean was calm, for now at least. As I maneuvered the sub toward the docking station, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the calm before the storm. Aquadome 7 was a beacon of hope, but it was also a target. And in the depths of the ocean, hope and danger were never far apart. Chapter 2. Into the Abyss. The briefing room was silent except for the hum of the holographic projector. On the table before us, A glowing display showed the last known position of Marlin 2, a single-pilot sub that had gone dark less than 12 hours ago. Lieutenant Graves was surveying Harbinger's Maw when we lost contact, Commander Everett said, his voice as grim as the lines on his face. Last transmission was garbled, but we're certain there was a hostile encounter. Graves. The name hit me like a weight. He wasn't just a fellow soldier. He was my closest friend. We'd come through training together, fought side by side on more missions than I could count. Now he was out there, alone, or worse. I'll find him, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Everett gave me a long look, then nodded. You'll be taking the Barracuda, he said, referring to my personal sub. Ripper drones will accompany you. Mission priority is recovery, but if you encounter whatever took down Marlin 2, proceed with caution. Understood, I said, already heading for the docks. The journey to Harbinger's Maw was uneventful at first, the ocean around me teeming with the strange, muted beauty of the deep. Schools of shimmering fish darted past, their bodies catching the faint glow of my sub's lights. An enormous, manta-like creature drifted lazily in the distance, its translucent wings undulating in a hypnotic rhythm. But as I approached the trench, that beauty gave way to something darker. The water seemed to thicken, the light from my flood lamps struggling to penetrate more than a few meters. The life forms here were fewer, stranger, twisted shapes that seemed ill-suited for existence. The Ripper drones moved in formation around the sub, their bladed limbs ready to act at a moment's notice. The AI pilot on my lead drone, Viper, chirped a calm status update into my comms. Rippers are operational and on standby, Captain, it said in its clipped, artificial tone. Good, I muttered, gripping the controls. Stay sharp. The maw appeared on the horizon like a great wound in the seafloor, a yawning chasm that seemed to drink the light. I checked the coordinates again, angling the sub toward the last recorded position of Marlin 2. The tension in my chest grew with every passing minute. Lancer to control, I said through the comms. Approaching target area. No sign of Graves or his drones yet. Copy that, Lancer, Control replied. Keep us updated. As I maneuvered along the trench wall, something caught my eye, a glint of metal in the floodlights. I brought the sub closer, my heart sinking as I recognized the wreckage of a Ripper drone, its body twisted and torn as if by enormous claws. Graves, I whispered. A few meters further, I found the second drone, its frame crumpled like paper. The lights on its core flickered weakly, and I could almost imagine it gasping for breath. Viper, initiate scan, I ordered. Scanning, the drone AI replied. After a moment, it chirped again. No life signs detected. No, I said, shaking my head. Keep looking. Then I saw it, the silhouette of Marlin 2, half buried in the silt at the trench's edge. I guided the sub closer, my floodlights revealing the battered hull. The cockpit glass was shattered, the interior dark. Control, I've located the sub, I said, my voice tight. No sign of Graves. As I stared at the wreck, a flicker of movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by my own sub. But then it moved again, deliberate and smooth. Something was in the water. Viper, perimeter scan now. Before the AI could respond, the creature emerged from the darkness. It was massive, humanoid, but alien, its long limbs and pale skin seeming to glow faintly in the murky water. Its head was grotesquely large, its face an unsettling mimicry of a human's. It swam toward me with deliberate slowness, almost lazily. as if it had all the time in the world. And then it smiled. Rows of teeth glinted in the floodlights, too human and yet too sharp. It pressed its face against the viewport, its black, endless eyes locking onto mine. My heart raced as I realized it wasn't just looking at me. It was studying me, reading me. Its mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but somehow felt. It was as if the very water around me vibrated with its intent. I wanted to scream, to fire the sub's weapons, to run, but I was frozen. The Ripper drones, sensing the threat, sprang into action. Their bladed arms spun as they charged the creature. One drone struck first, slashing at the creature's side. It didn't even flinch. With a casual swipe of its clawed hand, the creature tore the drone in two. The others followed, but their speed and ferocity were no match. One by one, they fell, reduced to scrap metal in mere seconds. "Control, this is Lancer," I shouted into the comms. "We've got a hostile. Repeat, hostile contact at Harbinger's Maw." The creature leaned closer, its grin widening. It tapped its claws against the glass, the sound reverberating through the sub like the tolling of a bell. Then, with a final glance, it pushed away and disappeared into the trench. I sat there in stunned silence, the remains of my drones drifting around me like fallen comrades. "Lancer, report." Control's voice crackled through the comms. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling on the controls. "We're not alone out here," I said. "Not by a long shot." Chapter 3. Into the Depths. The sub was dead. The cockpit lights had faded to a dim, sputtering glow, and the faint hum of the life support systems was gone. The air felt heavy, and my comms emitted only static. My chest tightened as I adjusted my oxygen mask, taking shallow breaths to conserve the supply. "Control, this is Lancer." I tried again, knowing it was futile. No response. I checked the diagnostics one last time, completely fried. Whatever that thing had done, it wasn't just a casual display of power. It had left me stranded, miles below the surface, at the edge of Harbinger's Maw. I had one option left. The Barracuda's emergency release chamber hissed as I stepped inside, the walls of the pod narrowing around me. The HUD flickered to life, displaying the startup sequence for the HYDRA mech suit. The suit was a marvel of engineering, a personal fortress designed for combat and repair in extreme underwater conditions. Its thick, segmented plates shimmered with a dark, anti-corrosive alloy that could withstand even the crushing pressures of the deep. Hydraulic servos and neural interfaces amplified every movement, turning me into a powerhouse capable of lifting tons with a flick of my wrist. Once the suit locked around my body, the controls synced with my neural uplink. The familiar weight of the whirlpool blade settled at my waist, a cylindrical weapon no larger than a baton when inactive. I activated it with a thought, and the device unfolded into a fast-spinning circular blade. The whirlpool blade was a vicious marvel. It revolved in a tight orbit around the mech, a halo of death that could slice through almost anything. I'd seen it shear through metal and bone with terrifying ease during combat trials. The blade moved autonomously, tracking targets with its onboard AI, while allowing me to direct its devastating arcs. As the chamber flooded, I felt the usual jolt of adrenaline. The mech sealed around me like a second skin, and I stepped out into the abyss. My floodlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the Barracuda's battered hull. The sub's exterior told the same story as its interior. Whatever that creature had done, it had overloaded every system. Panels hung loose, conduits were frayed, and the main thruster housing had been partially caved in. I gritted my teeth as I worked, patching wires and realigning panels with practiced precision. The mech's hydraulic arms made the work easier, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was the silence that unnerved me the most. Down here, there were no sounds, but the dull thrum of my suit and the occasional groan of shifting water currents. Even the trench's strange, twisted creatures seemed to have vanished, as if they knew better than to linger. Then, a shadow moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I turned, I saw it. A massive figure just beyond the reach of my floodlights. It was him. The creature drifted closer, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. This time, I saw it more clearly. Its grotesque humanoid form was both familiar and alien, its pale skin faintly luminescent in the darkness. Its long limbs ended in clawed fingers that seemed to glide effortlessly through the water. And in its hands, it held something, or rather, someone. Lieutenant Graves. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. Graves was still in his HYDRA suit, his body limp within its protective shell. The creature toyed with him, turning the heavy mech like a child might turn a doll. It flexed Graves's arms, twisted his head, and moved his lifeless legs in a grotesque mockery of life. I raised my arm, the whirlpool blade snapping to life with a high-pitched whir. "Let him go!" I shouted, the mech amplifying my voice into a distorted boom. The creature stopped and looked at me, its grin widening. It tilted Graves's head toward me, as if presenting him for inspection. Then it began to move his mouth, forcing his dead lips into a macabre imitation of speech. "Help me," the creature rasped, its voice guttural and hollow. Rage surged through me. I directed the whirlpool blade, sending it spinning toward the creature. The blade sliced through the water with deadly precision, but the monster swatted it aside like an insect. It laughed. The sound was low and resonant, filling the water around me with a vibration that made my teeth ache. I lunged forward, the HYDRA's servos propelling me with immense force. My gauntleted fist struck out, but the creature was too fast. It twisted away, releasing Graves's body, which floated lifelessly toward the trench floor. "No!" I shouted, diving after him. The creature didn't follow. It hovered above me, watching as I cradled Graves's mech in my arms. The suit was intact, but the man inside it was gone. "Graves," I whispered. The creature's grin never wavered. It mouthed something again, but this time I didn't need to hear it to understand. The malice in its expression said it all. This is just the beginning. As it retreated into the trench, I was left alone, clutching what remained of my friend. My comms crackled to life, just for a moment, but all I heard was static and faint laughter before the line went dead. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly powerless. Chapter 4. Dog on a leash. The grip was inescapable. Before I had time to react, the creature's enormous hand latched onto the back of my HYDRA mech, its fingers digging into the reinforced shell with a sound like cracking ice. I was already being dragged, faster than any sub could move, through the deep, the ocean around me transforming into a blur of shadows and pale, ghostly light. My body slammed against the seat, my breath knocked out of me as I instinctively tried to fight, but the mech's thrusters barely had time to adjust before I was ripped further into the abyss. The world outside was nothing but the looming darkness of the deep, the occasional flash of bioluminescent life passing by as the creature continued its relentless pull. It was all happening so fast. I couldn't get control. Every time I thought I could maneuver my mech, it was jerked again, dragged deeper, further, faster than I could keep up. The HYDRA, normally a powerful self-contained unit designed for combat, felt like a toy in the hands of this thing. And it wasn't just the sheer strength, it was the way the creature moved. Its body glided effortlessly through the water, like a predator that had lived in this environment for millennia. The smile, the grin, was always there. In my HUD, its massive face appeared, grinning at me with a malevolent delight that made my stomach churn. The creature's enormous eyes glinted with something between amusement and cruel intelligence. It wasn't just dragging me, it was playing. I was its prey, and it knew it. The water around us was dark, deep, and silent, save for the sound of my mech's thrusters desperately trying to stabilize. But no matter what I did, I couldn't keep up. The world outside was full of fleeting shapes, strange, glowing creatures that passed like quick flashes of light. Whales, huge and gentle, swam by in eerie silence, their massive forms gliding slowly through the water. Their eyes, vast and black, seemed to look right through me, as if they knew I was no longer the apex predator in this place. It wasn't just the HYDRA mech that was rendered helpless by this creature. The water itself seemed to shift under its influence, currents pushing against me, forcing me further into the deep, deeper into the trench that led to the heart of the ocean. I caught glimpses of the ocean floor far below, a labyrinth of rocky outcroppings and ancient coral reefs, but it was always moving too fast. I could only catch fragments, a flicker of movement, the dark outline of some ancient sea creature in the distance, and the feeling of the water, cold and heavy, surrounding me as I was pulled toward the inevitable. The creature didn't speak, but I could feel it watching me. Its grin stretched wider every time I struggled, its monstrous hands pulling harder, dragging me toward an unknown destination. I wasn't just being pulled through the deep, I was being delivered. And I was starting to understand exactly where it was taking me. The Aquadome 7 came into view, a massive structure rising from the depths, gleaming like a shard of glass against the dark sea. Aquadome 7 was pristine, untouched. It was still operational, its complex lights twinkling in the murky darkness, the city alive with the hum of power and technology. Unlike the stories of dying cities and dwindling resources, this place was thriving. The walls of the dome were reinforced, made of some durable, transparent material that allowed a clear view of the bustling life inside, an artificial, vibrant ecosystem teeming with all kinds of industry and commerce. The city was an example of human ingenuity, a testament to the best of our technological achievements. But now, as I was dragged closer, it felt less like a place of progress and more like a stage. The creature was pulling me, almost in a parade-like fashion, toward the heart of the city. I could see shadows in the windows, people moving behind the walls, unaware of the nightmare barreling toward them. As I was dragged closer to the city's gleaming walls, I began to feel an eerie sense of detachment. The creature wasn't simply moving me, it was showing me off. Like Achilles dragging Hector's body around the walls of Troy, this beast was dragging me through the gates of Aquadome 7, parading me before the city's people, a prize to flaunt. But unlike Hector, I wasn't dead. I was alive, helpless, and soon to be part of the destruction. The HYDRA mech slammed against the walls of the city, the hydraulic pressure making a sound like the shriek of tortured metal. The city's walls, designed to keep the ocean's crushing depths at bay, now felt like the walls of a tomb. The creature's hands pressed my mech against the surface, unyielding and indifferent to the damage caused. I could feel the massive tremor of the impact reverberating throughout the walls. People inside, citizens, workers, researchers, must have been watching in horror, their eyes fixed on the spectacle that was unfolding outside. Chapter 5. The Binding Dance. I was forced to look on, helpless, as the creature yanked my HYDRA mech away from its grip and dragged me toward an outer pillar of Aquadome 7, the towering column of reinforced, transparent material that held the outer wall together. The entire city was staring at me now. The lights of the buildings flickered in sync with the rhythm of the creature's movements, the hum of industry and life around us, a harsh contrast to the slow, deliberate torture I was being subjected to. Its massive hands released the mech just for a moment, and in that instant, I thought it might finally let go. But the creature had other plans. With a terrifying precision, it ripped several of the biomechanical tendrils off the outer wall of the city, tearing them from their places with a sickening sound of crunching metal and snapping cables. These tendrils, alien in design, were the key to the city's defense system. They siphoned off power from the tether and fed energy into the walls, granting them the strength to withstand the crushing pressures of the ocean. But now, these same tendrils were being twisted into ropes, their living components snaking and shifting as they were used to bind me. The creature was showing off, once again. It had no fear, no sense of urgency. It moved with the kind of certainty you get when you know your victory is inevitable. It lashed one end of the tendrils around the pillar and the other around the HYDRA mech. The living tendrils wrapped around me like serpents, each movement of the creature's hand a slow, mocking demonstration of its dominance. They coiled around my suit and the pillar, forcing my massive exosuit to bend and buckle against its restraints. The mech groaned under the pressure, but I couldn't break free. I struggled, pushed the systems to their limits, but it was no use. The creature smiled back at me, wider this time, its grin becoming grotesque. It stood there for a long moment, watching me, savoring the sight. My heart hammered in my chest, and the fear rose. I could do nothing. I was at its mercy now, tied to the pillar for the entire city to see. And then, it did something I never could have prepared myself for. It began to glow. A soft green light at first, just a faint flicker around its body. But as the seconds passed, the glow grew stronger, more brilliant. The light danced around its form, shifting in waves as though it were alive, pulsating to the rhythm of its own internal energy. The creature's skin seemed to absorb the light, reflecting it back with an eerie, supernatural intensity. Then, it started to move. It was a slow, deliberate dance, its movements rhythmic and unnervingly graceful. The creature's body twisted, its arms raised high in the water, like an underwater conjurer summoning a storm. The tendrils from the city's walls tightened around me as the creature's dance continued, sending ripples through the water that were felt across the city. It moved with purpose, as if performing some ancient ritual. I could only watch, helpless, as it danced and hummed, its eyes locked on mine, glinting with malice. The rhythm of its movements was hypnotic, almost mesmerizing. It felt like a conjuring, a seance to summon something dark and powerful, and I was its captive audience. The people of the city I knew were watching from their windows, from the screens that filled the city's streets. They could see the spectacle unfold, one of their own, bound, helpless, and displayed for the amusement of a creature from the abyss. But this wasn't just a show. The creature had other plans. As it moved, It raised its head to the sky, if you could call it a sky. The dome above our heads, which had once been a symbol of hope and security, was now an ominous backdrop to the creature's performance. It spread its arms wide as the glow intensified, and I realized that it wasn't just dancing, it was preparing something. And then, the city responded. The first attack came without warning. Ripper drones surged forward, a fleet of mechanical killers with sharp bladed limbs and hyper-agile frames. They shot toward the creature, propelled by their thrusters, their glowing red eyes flashing with fury. But the creature was ready. Without even breaking its dance, it reached out with one massive hand and crushed the first drone, twisting its body as though it were made of paper. The pieces of the Ripper drone scattered into the water, floating aimlessly before sinking into the dark depths. More drones followed, dozens of them, darting and slicing toward the creature from every direction. It didn't stop moving. The creature simply spun, its dance a blur of calculated elegance, dodging and parrying the drones with unnatural fluidity. When a Ripper drone got too close, it would snap its jaws like a giant clam, tearing the drone to pieces with one bite. I watched in disbelief as the creature demolished the city's last line of defense, the drones falling like flies. Each strike was precise, as though the creature knew exactly how to target them, where to strike, how to twist, how to eliminate the threat with ease. There was no struggle, no effort. The creature moved like a force of nature, untouchable, unstoppable. Then came the mechs. A squadron of whirlpool mechs, each armed with their spinning blades, appeared from the city's depths, their forms slicing through the water with deadly precision. These mechs were built for one thing: close combat. With their rotating blades, designed to spin around them like a hula hoop of death, they could carve through anything, from the toughest monsters to the thickest walls. They launched themselves at the creature, trying to surround it from all sides. But once again, the creature was not concerned. With a fluid motion, it swatted aside the first two mechs, sending them flying through the water with an almost comical ease. They tumbled end over end, their blades still spinning wildly, but their pilots long gone. The creature's movements were so effortless, so precise, that I realized it wasn't just strong. It was vastly more intelligent than anything we had ever encountered. It had no fear. It was in complete control of the battle. The whirlpool mechs circled the creature, but it danced through them like a deadly waltz, avoiding their blades and tearing them apart with swift, brutal gestures. The water around us was filled with the sound of crashing metal, the shredded remnants of drones and mechs drifting away into the deep. The city's defenses were falling. One by one, they were eliminated, and all I could do was watch from my binding. The creature's grin never wavered. It finished its dance, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it turned toward me again, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. It knew that the city's defenses had failed. It knew that Aquadome 7 would fall, and it was ready for the next phase. As the last whirlpool mech fell, sinking to the ocean floor, the creature began to move toward me, its steps slow and confident. It reached out, its enormous hands wrapping around the tendrils that bound me to the pillar. I could feel its eyes on me, cold, calculating. The battle was over. Chapter 6. The Choice of Cowardice. The creature's voice reverberated in my ears, its tone as cold and ancient as the depths of the ocean itself. "You have a choice," it hissed, its words echoing through the water, like the slow, deliberate crawl of a predator. "Save the city, or save yourself." Save the city or save myself. The words pressed into my skull, grinding my thoughts to a halt. There was no hesitation in the creature's offer, only a deep, undeniable certainty that I would have to choose. Aquadome 7, my home, humanity's sanctuary beneath the waves, lay before me, vast and untouched. The outer walls of the city gleamed in the darkness, the immense structure holding steady in the crushing pressure of the ocean. It was beautiful, unscathed. The lights inside the city flickered faintly, but there was no sign of distress, no indication that anything was amiss. The beast, the silent dread, stood before me, its monstrous grin widening with each passing second. It could feel my fear, I knew that much. It could see my hesitation, hear my heartbeat thundering in my chest. The creature's presence pressed down on me, suffocating, like a tidal wave of pure malice. But there was a choice, and I knew what I had to do. The weight of that choice settled in my stomach. I could save the city. Aquadome 7, this floating fortress of humanity, was pristine, alive with the hum of life. It had endured so much, but could it endure the creature's wrath? The walls that once stood unbroken were now in its grasp, but still, there was time. I could act. I could save it. I had to. And yet, I could save myself. It was then, in that agonizing moment, that I realized the truth. I had already made the decision. The choice was never about the city. The city was already doomed. The creature knew that, and in its quiet, mocking way, it was just waiting for me to admit it. The pressure in my chest rose. I was overwhelmed with dread, and the thought of fighting, of truly sacrificing myself for the city, it was too much. I could feel it, the weight of the decision pressing me into submission. The creature's grin grew wider, sensing my defeat. It knew what was coming. I slammed my fist into the control panel of the mech. My hands shook uncontrollably, but I forced myself to override the systems, to initiate the escape protocol. The tendrils that had bound me released, loosening their grip as the mech's systems hummed back to life. I could feel it, the relief, the escape, but it was hollow. The creature's malevolent smile burned into my mind. I had chosen. The city, the last bastion of humanity's pride, was doomed. The glowing tendrils around the city, once a source of power and protection, began to lose their strength. The biomechanical tendrils that had been siphoning energy from the beast and its tether, those pillars that held the city's shields in place, began to weaken. They pulsed erratically, their light flickering, before finally dimming. The outer walls of the city, which had once stood like the impenetrable bastions of a future unbreakable, started to lose their integrity. And then, the unthinkable happened. The water around Aquadome 7 began to shimmer. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe some flaw in the mech's display. But no, I could feel it. The heat, the searing warmth from deep within the ocean. The creature's presence was tearing at the fabric of reality itself, sending ripples of destructive energy across the sea. A strange hum filled the water, a frequency I couldn't hear, but could feel deep in my chest. It was almost as if the ocean itself was recoiling from the presence of the silent dread, as if the water had become an instrument of agony. The city started to melt, its once pristine surfaces warping, slowly turning into a viscous, boiling mass. The walls, the towers, the sprawling structures of Aquadome 7, all of them started to degrade, to disintegrate, as if the very water around them was being cooked from the inside out. I watched in horror as the city that had stood as humanity's beacon slowly faded away, collapsing into the abyss. The metal walls began to dissolve into a fog of shimmering liquid, as if the city itself were being boiled alive by some unseen force. The lights inside the dome flickered one last time before they went out, leaving only the darkness of the deep. And then came the voices. I could hear them, muffled but unmistakable. The screams of the people still inside the city. It was impossible. The pressure at this depth should have been enough to stop any sound from escaping, but I heard them. The cries, the agony. 100,000 souls calling out to me, but I couldn't help them. I had made my choice, and they were paying the price. I couldn't escape the sound, the terrible chorus of suffering that echoed in my head. It was maddening. The memories of the city, its people, its life, were drowning beneath the waves of destruction, as though they had never existed. The creature, satisfied with my decision, stepped back, its grin stretching impossibly wider. It looked at me, eyes glinting with amusement, and I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. And then, it turned. Slowly, it began to leave, its massive form vanishing into the inky blackness of the ocean. The tendrils holding me, holding the mech, went limp. The grip that had held me for so long was gone. I was free. The mech's systems hummed back to life, and I was able to move again. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. The city was gone. The people were gone. And it was all my fault. The creature was leaving, disappearing into the abyss. It had gotten what it wanted. But I didn't care. I was alive, and that was the only thing that mattered. I don't know how long I sat there in the wreckage of Aquadome 7. Time lost all meaning. The city had crumbled into the ocean, and with it, any hope of redemption. I had made the choice to save myself, to let 100,000 people perish for my own survival. I had chosen cowardice, and now I would pay the price. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself lying on a deserted island. The sky was bright, the sun burning through the haze of the ocean. It was peaceful, but the peace did nothing to quell the storm that raged inside me. The choice I had made was irreversible. Aquadome 7 was no more, and I was the one who had condemned it. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, knowing that I would never be free from the screams that echoed in my mind, never free from the city that I had failed.